I'm what I like to call hesitantly disappointed in the way Legacy is progressing thus far. I have complaints about all the races, as well as some of the fundamental design aspects themselves. This is going to be a longer episode, so buckle up. As a reminder, I play Protoss, so some of my opinions may be biased or incorrect, but they're my opinions, not facts. I'll start with Protoss, I suppose. I feel that fights as Protoss are quickly turning into a giant mess. Here's a list of every Protoss unit in the game. Here's that same list, but highlighted is every unit with an active ability that should be casted directly by the player. That's a pretty disheartening ratio. There's so many things to do in an average fight that it ends up doing the opposite of the developer's intentions. Rather than microing my units with thought and consideration, I feel as if I'm just spamming every button I can without any strategic decisioning behind it. When, even up to a diamond level, abilities are being spammed rather than used strategically, there's definitely a problem. I also dislike how Protoss has so few answers to mass amounts of air units. Terrans have Widow Mines, Liberators, and Seeker Missiles. Zerg has Fungals, Parasitic Bomb, and to an extent Mutas. Protoss has Storm and Archons. Both Taran and Zerg have relatively speedy air-based options against mass air that are easily massable to an extent. Liberators with Reactors, Vipers or Mutas with Banked Larva. Protoss has Phoenix. They're built one at a time and very babysit heavy. Not micro heavy, babysit heavy. There's a difference. And don't really have the capability to deal with huge amounts of air units all that well. Storms and Archons are strong, but the majority of the time they aren't fast enough to keep up with the mass amounts of air units, specifically Mutas, Banshees, Phoenix, or Void Rays. There's many ways we could go about fixing this, but I want to bring up an old Wings of Liberty beta ability. It was for the Phoenix and it was called Overlord. Overload, and it allowed the Phoenix to do large amounts of splash damage to all nearby air units, the drawback being that it was immobile during the ability and then rendered completely useless, unable to move or shoot for a short period afterwards. This would allow for viable counters to mass air units with air units from Protoss, while also allowing for strategic decision making and counterplay. When I read the most recent community feedback and I saw that Immortal Shields were going to become autocast, my heart sunk. This is a step backwards, but also off a cliff into the cold, unforgiving sea. I'd prefer we do a 180 and take a step backwards farther onto the cliff into hardened shield land. I don't like the idea of taking an already dumb ability and adding more arbitrary rules to make it almost hardened shields, but not quite. I think this bothers me so much because it's a major example of the vocal minority affecting balance in a big way. There were people on Reddit and the Battle.net forums calling for the Immortal changes because they said it was, and I quote, a boring A-move unit, with various flavors of, and it's bullshit added to the end. These are probably the same people that complain about Void Rays and turn them into a press button get advantage, rather than use your surroundings and quick thinking to get an advantage. Remember charging up Void Rays on your own pylons or units to maximize their damage once the fighting started? That was fucking awesome. It really differentiated low-level Void Ray play from high-level Void Ray play. But now it's a push-button get advantage because people whined in the forums about it. You really have to take those types of complaints with a grain of salt. I mean, really. You know what I don't go to the forums to do? Say, Immortals are perfectly fine, just making a whole thread to say that don't change them at all. Leads to this super dumb scenario where the only people saying anything are the same people who have a problem with it in the first place. It's just bias city all day, every day. In terms of quality of life, Protoss got a few nice things in the last patch that really help. Increasing Nexus supply by 1 means you don't have to cut a probe to get your first pylon out. Unfortunately, early expansion builds still have the same issue as before, where you're forced to have a terrible Artosis pylon, or have twice as much supply as you need between the time Warp Gate starts and when it finishes. I'm honestly not sure how you'd go about fixing this, but it's super annoying. Moving on, Taran has probably the most unit-based problems. I think I'm with a lot of people when I say that the Cyclone is pretty dumb. It's a unit with siege range, a huge damage output, it's relatively tanky, it's very fast, hits air and ground, and has a moving shot. So what's the downside? Yeah. I feel like this is a reoccurring theme with the new Legacy of the Void units. Seems odd to me that they'd overlook something so fundamental. None of them have a clear downside to them that can be exploited during a fight to gain an edge. Think like how the Broodlord is tanky and has siege range, but is extremely slow, so positioning is super important. Or how the Colossus has siege range and high damage output, but it's kinda squishy and vulnerable to air units. This unit just feels boring, an easy to use jack of all trades, but unlike the Stalker, it doesn't have a cool utility option, and it isn't a shit unit. Here's a brief synopsis of how a large-scale engagement against primarily Cyclone compositions go. Oh look, his Cyclone's locked on. Better back up. But wait, Cyclones are faster than every unit in my army except for Stalkers. I guess I should run forward and try and kill them. Oh, he clicked behind his army, so now they're running away faster than my units can catch up. So I guess I should back up. But I can't because he's faster, and as long as he stays in the fucking 15 tolerance range, he's fine. So what am I supposed to do, game? Fuck all? Okay, I'll get right on that. I probably seem pretty angry about this. That's fine though, because I am. I just can't agree with this sort of unit design. It seems lazy and the unit's functions are so bland and uninspired. I hate to say it, but I'd honestly prefer to see this unit scrapped. Let me break my tangent with another tangent for a second to say that I don't take scrapping units very lightly. To this day, I'm still mad at Blizzard for scrapping ideas like the Replicant and the Herc before the game was even publicly available. There's only so much internal testing can do. You can't theorycraft every single concept. They were really cool unit concepts that never even saw the light of day. It's just sad. Anyway, on to the Liberator. I don't like this unit very much either. It falls into the same design as Cyclones. Tanky, very fast, high splash damage output, siege range versus ground, and can be reactored out. So what's the downside? Right. Same problem as the Cyclone. Unlike the Cyclone though, I think this design has some potential to work around. I like its various functions, and I think there's room for improvement with all of them. One concern I do have though is that either map design is going to have to change or Phoenix openers are going to have to be the standard, because there's some areas on some maps where there is no possible way for ground units to hit Liberators and prevent mineral harass. Overall, Liberator Strike Me is in the same vein as the Cyclones. It's a jack of all trades unit that could probably have been split into 2 units, but it's still not like the Stalker because it's also not shit. On a completely different note, while I support the decision to remove or weaken macro mechanics, I think planetary fortresses are going to quickly become some of the most obnoxious shit in the game. You know how all the Terrans and Zergs dislike Photon Overcharge because it's a one-click defense? Well, imagine Photon Overcharge, but the Nexus is repairable, it does slightly more damage to single targets, does splash damage, and has no energy limitation. Yeah, that sounds fucking awful actually. I like the idea that Planetary Fortress is becoming more viable, and that it's a choice now between orbital and planetary, but either orbitals need to be toned up or planetaries need to be toned down, because right now it doesn't feel like very much of a choice. Lose all my workers for scouting information, or have an unkillable base. Lose all my workers for scouting information, or have an unkillable base. I suppose I've spent long enough on Taran now, so let's move on. Zerg is actually pretty alright in its current state, to be honest. Ravagers have a clear downside, being less tanky than Roaches, and Lurkers now have a clear counter in the newly designed Disruptor Reaver. I think auto-injects are going to be a problem though, but not necessarily for the reasons I've seen so far, or at least nobody's been able to articulate them properly, so I'll try my best to bring it across here. Zerg has been a race fundamentally balanced around the ability to remax. Remax potential was only gained in the late game due to large amounts of larva that could be banked with larva injects. Good players with good injects could bank that larva up faster and in turn gain remax potential much faster. Automatic larva injects present 2 problems. It compensates heavily for bad macro, and it makes remaxes way more widely available from a much earlier time. Imagine this scenario. A Taran is parade pushing but completely forgets to make units out of his 8 barracks during the push. Now when he goes back to his base, instead of saying, "Oh fuck, I have no units," he simply presses a button and now instantly makes 40 Marines. This is the practical effect of automated injects. Their production banks itself, but not in a good way. Protoss production banks itself in a good way though. You can bank up warp gates so that they're all off cooldown, but the longer you wait, the more warp in cycles you miss. Sure, you could warp in off of all of them instantly when you need to, but you don't also get the extra production cycles that you missed. Essentially what I'm saying is Zerg is trying to have their cake and eat it too. This can be solved in a number of ways, very likely a ton more than I can think of, but I think lowering the max larva cap on bases could theoretically solve this issue. The current cap is, I think, somewhere between 19 and 25 larvae, but I can't find an exact value, and I have better things to do than watch paint dry, like editing this video, so someone's gonna have to fact check me on that. That's approximately 40 supply per hatchery in the mid-late game that can quickly be dumped into any unit you want. Lowering that to some degree would have positive effects. It would mean that Remax potential is weakened any time before you can get lots of macro hatches, and missing production cycles would be far more detrimental since you would be losing production cycles much earlier. So that's it. All my thoughts on design and balance in the game so far in beta. Keep in mind this video is mainly focused on points of improvement for the game rather than on things that are already fine, which is ironic considering what I said about 12 paragraphs ago. I think there's a lot of things that they're doing right, like warp gate changes, but I don't have time for those in this video, since it's already been going on long enough already. In any case, my name is Walnut. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube and follow me on Twitch and Twitter. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you guys next time.